The trapdoor sits in the floor of the sacristy, above the kitchen, in the dark before dawn. It is a plain square of boards, set over an old garderobe shaft, the sort of thing a searcher would step across without a second glance. On this morning, it is open. Below it runs a narrow stone channel, a medieval drain, cold and close, and barely wide enough for a grown person to stand. One by one, 10 people climb down into it. There are 5 priests among them. There are 2 novices and 3 servants, and every one of them lowers himself through that hole into the wet dark, while, somewhere above and beyond the moat, fists are already hammering on the main gate. It is around 5 in the morning. The approach roads are blocked. Armed men are shouting that the house is surrounded, and inside the house, the last of the 10 is pulling the trapdoor shut over his own head. Upstairs, the servants who stayed behind are working fast. They gather the hidden men's boots and their swords and carry them out of sight. They turn the mattresses over so that a searcher's hand pressed to the bedding will not feel the warmth of a body that was lying there minutes before. Every trace of 10 sleeping men has to vanish before the gate gives way. Down in the channel, the water rises somewhere between ankle and knee, and the 10 of them settle in to wait. They will stand in that cold for more than 4 hours. Hold that image there, the 10 of them in the dark under the floor, and let us come back up, out of the drain and out of that morning entirely. Because to understand how they came to be standing in a sewer beneath a Warwickshire manor, we have to go back a very long way. We have to go back before the priests, before the raid, before the family whose house this was. We have to go back to the forest. The land here was once part of the Forest of Arden, a great spread of woodland across the middle of England. In the 13th century, a Saxon settler named Badde cleared a patch of that forest for farmland. The clearing took his name, and so did the place, the first half of a name that people still say today. Later, the Clinton family settled on the site, and it was the Clintons who dug the moat, a wide ring of water enclosing the ground where the house would stand. Their name joined his, Badde's clearing, and the Clinton moat together gave the manor its full name, Baddesley Clinton. The moat was not only for show. The house sat close to the woodland, and a broad band of water made a sound defence against fire spreading from the trees. So from the very beginning, the place was built around water, ringed by it, protected by it. That detail will matter later. The same moat that guarded the house against flame would one day slow the men who came to search it. For a long while the manor passed through hands the way most medieval estates did, by inheritance and marriage and purchase. Then in 1438, a man named John Brome bought the manor of Baddesley Clinton outright. The Bromes were a rising family, and with that purchase they took ownership of the moated site and the land around it. The house became theirs, and it stayed in their line for the better part of a century. In 1483, the estate passed to Nicholas Brome, who inherited it on his mother's death. Nicholas Brome is one of those figures the records will not let you forget. A man tangled in violence, even by the standards of his age. A few years before he inherited, in 1478, he had appointed a man named William Foster as parish priest of Baddesley Clinton's church. That appointment would end in blood. The story, as the better sources tell it, is this. Nicholas Brome came home to the manor, unexpectedly one day, around the mid-1480s, and found the priest Foster in the parlour with his wife, the priest's hand under her chin. Brome drew his sword and killed the man where he stood. It is a brutal little scene, and the accounts differ on the exact year, but the shape of it is well attested. A lord of the manor, a parish priest, a moment in a private room, and a death. What Brome did afterwards tells you as much as the killing itself. He did not simply bury the matter. He sought a dispensation from the Pope for what he had done, and in time he received a pardon. As penance, he rebuilt in stone. He added a tower to the parish church at a reported cost of £400, a very large sum for the age. He raised the church roof, and he installed 3 new bells. A man had killed a priest, and to answer for it, he raised a tower over the graves and hung new bells in it. That tower still stands. Brome's temper was not spent on Foster alone. In 1492, he killed again, this time a man named John Hurthill, a steward of the Earl of Warwick, who had earlier killed Brome's own father. For that second death, the court imposed only a heavy fine rather than execution, taking into account the killing of his father that lay behind it. So the man who owned Baddesley Clinton at the turn of the 16th century was a killer twice over, pardoned once by the Pope and once by the court, and remembered now chiefly for the church he built to buy back his soul. In 1517, Nicholas Brome died, and here the whole story of the house turns on a single marriage. His estate passed to his daughter, and through her marriage, Baddesley Clinton came into the hands of the Ferrers family. A Ferrers had married into the Brome line by around 1500, and that union began something remarkable. From that point, the Ferrers family would hold Baddesley Clinton for roughly 500 years, across 12 generations. One family, one house, half a millennium. Very few families in England can claim such a grip on a single place, and the Ferrers held on through wars, through changes of religion, through every upheaval the country threw at them. The Ferrers, who matters most for our story, is Henry Ferrers, born in 1549 and living until 1633, a man known to later ages as the Antiquary. The name was earned. Henry Ferrers was a scholar and a collector of the past, a man who cared about records and buildings and the history of his county. He left his mark on the house directly. He built out the Great Hall, giving the interior much of the character it still carries. He added stained glass so that coloured light fell across the rooms where his family lived. If you walk through Baddesley Clinton and feel the weight of the Tudor age in the timber and the glass, a great deal of what you are feeling is Henry Ferrers. But Henry Ferrers lived through a dangerous time to be the man he was, because the Ferrers family were Roman Catholics, and they would not give up their faith. In Elizabethan England, that was no small thing. The old religion had been pushed to the edge of the law. To hold to it openly was to become a recusant, one who refused to attend the services of the new church, and recusancy carried heavy fines and heavier suspicion. Worse still was the sheltering of priests. To be a Catholic priest in England in those years, or to hide one, was to risk death. The gallows waited for priests who were caught, and for some of those who harboured them. The Ferrers family lived under exactly that threat. They were recusants who went on quietly sheltering priests through the whole long stretch of persecution, keeping the old faith alive behind the moat and the sandstone walls while the law hunted men like the ones they hid. This is the deep current running under the polite surface of the house, a family of scholars and collectors who were also, in the eyes of the state, criminals for what they believed. The Great Hall and the stained glass belonged to the same family that would one day need somewhere to hide 5 priests in a hole. By the later 1580s, though, Henry Ferrers himself was often away. His interests and his work drew him to London, and a great house in Warwickshire cannot easily be run by a man who is rarely in it. So Ferrers made an arrangement that would prove far more important than he could have guessed. In 1588, he leased Baddesley Clinton to 2 sisters, Anne Vaux and Eleanor Brooksby, who had been born Vaux, and who came from a family as firmly and dangerously Catholic as his own. It matters exactly what this arrangement was, so let me be plain about it. Henry Ferrers remained the legal owner of Baddesley Clinton throughout. The Vaux sisters did not buy the house and did not own it. They were tenants, leasing the place from Ferrers, and what they brought to it was not money, but purpose. Anne Vaux and Eleanor Brooksby were devout women deeply tied to the underground Catholic mission, and in Baddesley Clinton they saw exactly what that mission needed. Here was a large, private, moated house, set among quiet Warwickshire fields, owned by a Catholic family and now placed in sympathetic hands. Here was a place where hunted men could gather. That is what the sisters made of it. Under their tenancy, Baddesley Clinton became a base for the priests who moved in secret through England, a refuge on the network of Catholic houses that kept the faith alive against the law. The women ran the household. They decided who came and who was sheltered, and they took on themselves the enormous risk of it. When you picture the raid to come, remember that it was a woman in her nightgown who would meet the armed men at the door, and that she did so in a house she did not own, but had chosen to fill with fugitives. Think, then, of what Baddesley Clinton already was by the end of the 1580s. It had grown from a Saxon's forest clearing and a moat dug by the Clintons. It had passed through John Brome's purchase in 1438 and Nicholas Brome's bloody, penitent lordship. It had come by marriage to the Ferrers, who held it across 12 generations, and it had been shaped by Henry Ferrers, the antiquary, into a fine Tudor house of hall and glass. And it had become quietly a Catholic stronghold in a Protestant kingdom, a family of recusants sheltering priests under threat of the rope. What the house did not yet have was its secret architecture. For all its size and privacy, Baddesley Clinton in 1588 was still just a house, with rooms and floors and fireplaces that any determined searcher could work through. There was as yet no hidden channel beneath the sacristy floor, no space above the bedroom closet low enough to crawl into, no chamber under the library reached through a fireplace. The genius that would let 10 people vanish into the fabric of the building had not yet arrived. The house could gather priests, but it could not yet make them disappear. That last piece was about to come, carried by one small and extraordinary man. By 1588, Henry Ferrers had left for London and handed the keys of Baddesley Clinton to the sisters Anne Vaux and Eleanor Brooksby. And within a year, a short, stooping carpenter named Nicholas Owen would come to change the house from the inside. By 1588, Henry Ferrers had left for London and handed the keys of Baddesley Clinton to the sisters Anne Vaux and Eleanor Brooksby. And within a year, a short, stooping carpenter named Nicholas Owen would come to change the house from the inside. He did not arrive as a builder. He arrived as a servant. In 1589, he approached Father Henry Garnet, the superior of the Jesuit mission in England, and asked to be taken into his service. It was a strange request from a skilled man. Owen was a trained joiner and carpenter who had served an 8-year apprenticeship, and a tradesman with that much behind him could command steady work in any town. He wanted something else entirely. Owen was a Jesuit lay brother, bound to the mission by faith rather than by wage. He had already decided how to spend his hands. He would use the craft of an ordinary joiner to hide extraordinary men, and he would do it in houses like this one, where priests came and went under threat of death. Garnet took him on. From that decision came the work that saved lives inside these walls, and the work that this act is really about. To understand what Owen built, you first have to understand who paid and how the money moved. The answer is unusual, and it matters. Anne Vaux and Eleanor Brooksby were the ones who commissioned the hides. They were sisters, both from the Catholic Vaux family, and they had leased Baddesley Clinton as tenants from 1588. They were not the owners. Henry Ferrers, the antiquary who had built out the Great Hall and set stained glass into these rooms, remained the legal owner of the house the entire time. He held the deeds in London while the sisters held the household in Warwickshire. That gap between owner and tenant is the quiet engine of this whole story. Ferrers kept the title, which meant the house stayed respectable on paper, a gentleman's manor in the family for generations. The sisters ran the daily life of the place, which meant the house became a base for the underground mission without the owner's name ever appearing over the work. When the digging and cutting began inside the walls, it was the tenants who ordered it, and the tenants who covered it. The man who owned the moat and the sandstone was not the man who decided what would be hollowed out beneath the floors, so the sisters commissioned Nicholas Owen. Here, the money does something you rarely see in a house of this period. Owen never charged. For all the nights he spent breaking into stone and timber, for skill that no other man in England could match, he took no fee for the work itself. When money was pressed on him, he did not keep it. He gave it away to the Jesuits, to the same mission he served. He was paid, in a sense, but never in coin that stayed in his own hand. His wage was the survival of the men who would one day climb into the spaces he cut. That refusal was not modesty for its own sake. It was security. A tradesman who takes a large fee leaves a trail. Ledgers remember payments. Neighbours notice a poor man suddenly flush with silver, and pursuivants paid to hunt priests knew how to follow money as well as rumour. By taking nothing, Owen left nothing to trace. There was no bill, no receipt, no sum in an account book that a searcher could point to and ask what all that timber had been for. The work paid for in secrecy left no paper behind it. His method matched the money. Owen worked alone, and he worked at night. This was the heart of his craft, more than the joinery itself. He did not bring a gang of labourers into the house. He did not let the household's own servants watch him lift a floorboard or open a chimney. He set his own tools to the stone in the dark, hour after hour, so that when a hide was finished, only a handful of people alive knew it existed. The servants who cooked and cleaned and slept under this roof could be questioned, threatened, even tortured, and they would have nothing to give up. You cannot betray a room you were never shown. Think about what that cost him in labour. Cutting through medieval masonry by hand, quietly, is slow and punishing work. A single hide might take weeks of night shifts, the debris carried away and hidden, the surfaces made good so that no fresh cut or new mortar caught the eye by daylight. He fitted panels that swung true, floors that gave no hollow sound underfoot, entrances disguised as fireplaces, and cupboards and drains. Every hide had to survive not a glance, but a determined hour-long search by men who knew exactly what they were looking for. Owen built for that test, and no lesser one. At Baddesley Clinton, he built at least 3. Each was different, because the house gave him different bones to work with, and because a clever searcher who found one hide would stop looking once he thought the job was done. The first was set high, in the roof space above a bedroom closet. It is a cramped place, just 3 feet 9 inches high, so low that a grown man cannot stand and can barely sit upright inside it. Yet it could hold up to about 6 people at need, folded into the dark under the rafters while the household below carried on as if nothing were wrong. A searcher climbing to check the bedrooms would pass the closet and never think to look above it. The second hide went the other way, down instead of up. Beneath the library floor, Owen cut a space, and the way into it ran through the fireplace of the great parlour. A man could step into what looked like an ordinary hearth and go down out of sight, into a chamber that no plan of the house would show. The genius of it is the misdirection. A fireplace is the most innocent thing in a room. Nobody expects a chimney breast to be a door, and a pursuivant, warming himself at the grate, would be standing on the very route his quarry had used to disappear. The third hide was the largest, and it is the one this house is remembered for. Running the length of the building beneath the floors was an old medieval sewer and drain, a stone channel built centuries earlier to carry waste away from the manor. Owen saw a hiding place in it. He converted the drain into a refuge that could hold 6 or 7 people crouching in the dark. The way in was hidden with real cunning. Above the channel, in the floor of the sacristy, sat an old garderobe shaft, the stone throat of a disused privy. Owen set a trapdoor over that shaft, lift it, and a line of men could climb down one by one into the sewer beneath the house, then close the door above their heads and vanish under the searchers' feet. It is worth pausing on how grim that refuge was. This was not a dry, panelled cupboard. It was a working relic of the house's plumbing. A cold stone gut running under the building reached through the shaft of a privy. Water stood in it. A man who went down there stood in the dark, hunched, in the cold, for as long as the danger lasted, breathing the air of a drain. Owen offered no comfort, only survival. Between the low roof hide, the library hide behind the parlour fireplace, and the long sewer beneath the sacristy, he gave the household 3 separate answers to the same terrible question. Where do 10 hunted people go when the gate is being broken down? The man who built all this was not physically imposing. Owen was short, and his spine was twisted, so that he never stood straight even in his best years. After an accident in 1599, he walked with a pronounced limp, his gait uneven for the rest of his life. Picture that body doing the work. A small, bent, limping man, alone in the dark, driving tools into stone and oak through the night, in spaces so tight that his own crookedness may have been the only frame that could fit inside them. The joke of it is almost holy. The most broken body in the house built the places that kept whole men alive. Baddesley Clinton was not his only work, and that is how we know his hand was trusted across the whole underground network. Nicholas Owen is credited with priest holes in some of the most important Catholic houses in England. Cotton Court, the Throckmorton seat not far from here. Harvington Hall in Worcestershire, which holds one of the finest surviving sets of hides anywhere. Oxburgh Hall out in Norfolk, moated like this one. Scotney Old Castle down in Kent. For years he moved between such houses as Garnet's servant, carrying his tools and his secrets, leaving behind him a hidden geography that no map recorded and no ledger paid for. Owen alone knew how many hides he had made and where. That secrecy was the whole point, and it held to the very end of his life. Long after his years at Baddesley Clinton in 1606, Owen was arrested and taken to the Tower of London and put to the rack. He died under torture without giving up a single hiding place he had built. Whatever the interrogators did to that bent and limping body, the location stayed inside him. It is a chilling proof of the method he had followed from the start. He built alone so that no servant could talk. He took no coin so that no ledger could talk. And in the end, he made certain that not even he would talk. The secret cost him his life and outlived him intact. Bring it all back to this house and to 1589 when the work began. Anne Vaux and Eleanor Brooksby held the keys as tenants, while Henry Ferrers held the deeds in London. A short, twisted carpenter came in the guise of a servant and asked for no wage. Night after night, alone, he opened the roof above a bedroom closet, cut a chamber beneath the library floor, and turned a medieval sewer into a refuge reached through a privy shaft in the sacristy. He carried the knowledge of all 3 in his own head and shared it with almost no one. He built for a single purpose, a morning that had not yet come when the house would be surrounded and the searchers would come through the door. For a while, the work simply sat there, finished and waiting. The hides gathered dust behind their disguises. Priests came to Baddesley Clinton and left again, and the roof space and the fireplace and the drain kept their secret without ever being needed in earnest. Owen had spent his nights preparing for a test that might never arrive, in a house that looked to any ordinary visitor exactly like the quiet manor of an absent gentleman. That was the measure of good work. It was invisible until the day it had to save someone. On a cold morning, in mid-October 1591, 5 years of Nicholas Owen's secret carpentry faced the only test that ever mattered, when armed pursuivants reached the moat at 5 a.m. On a cold morning in mid-October 1591, 5 years of Nicholas Owen's secret carpentry faced the only test that ever mattered, when armed pursuivants reached the moat at 5 a.m. The water in the moat was black and still. The house behind it was full of men who could not afford to be found. What happened over the next 4 hours would decide whether the underground Catholic mission in England had a future at all. To understand the danger, go back one day. The evening before the raid, Baddesley Clinton was fuller than it had ever been. Father Henry Garnet, the superior of the Jesuit mission in England, had called his people in. Every Jesuit priest and every novice then working in the country was summoned to this one moated manor near Gnole. It was meant to be a gathering, a moment for the scattered leadership to meet under one roof. It was also, without anyone intending it, the single most dangerous concentration of hunted men in the kingdom. Think about what that meant. The entire command of the secret mission sat inside one house at the same time. If the government had planned the timing themselves, they could not have chosen a better night. The men who kept the faith alive in England, the ones who moved from safe house to safe house and slipped through the hands of the authorities for years, were all in one place. And in the dark before dawn, the authorities came to the door. The approach began at around 5 a.m. This was mid-October in the year 1591, and the exact calendar day is not fully settled in the records, though it is commonly given as the 18th. What is not in doubt is the hour and the method. The pursuivants blocked the roads that led to the house. They surrounded the moat. Then they hammered on the main gate and shouted that the house was surrounded, that there was no way out, that the search was already beginning. The timing was cruel in another way. The household had planned a mass for that morning. The priests were preparing for it. In an hour or two, the house would have been openly, visibly Catholic, with vestments out and the altar set. Instead, the fists on the gate arrived first. The morning that was meant to hold a quiet act of worship became a scramble for survival in the dark. 10 people went down. Let that number sit for a moment. 10 human beings lowered themselves out of the ordinary house and into the space Nicholas Owen had built beneath it. 5 of them were priests. Their names carry the whole weight of the moment. Henry Garnet, the superior who had called the gathering. John Gerard, who would later write his own account of a hunted life. Robert Southwell, the poet-priest. Edward Oldcorne, Thomas Stanney. With them went 2 Jesuit novices and 3 servants, making 10 in all. The way down was through the floor of the sacristy. Set into that floor was a trapdoor, and the trapdoor covered an old garderobe shaft, the disused stone chute of a medieval privy. Owen had taken that forgotten shaft and turned it into a door. Below it ran the largest of his hides at Baddesley Clinton, a converted medieval sewer that ran the length of the building, reached only through this one opening in the sacristy floor. One by one the 10 climbed down into it. At the bottom there was water. It stood ankle to knee deep in the narrow stone channel, cold with the season, in a space barely wide enough for a grown person to stand. The sources differ on the exact depth, but they agree it was cold and it was rising around their feet, and they agree on the duration, which is the part that stops you. The 10 stood in that water for more than 4 hours. Over their heads, boots crossed the floorboards from room to room. While the 10 climbed down, the rest of the household did the quiet, clever work that made the hide survive. This is the part that professionals notice. Owen had built the space, but a hide is only as good as the cover story told above it, and the servants of Baddesley Clinton knew their part. They gathered up the hunted men's boots and their swords and hid them, because a priest's boots by a bed would betray a priest as surely as the priest himself. They stripped the evidence of 10 extra men out of the visible house. Then they turned to the beds. This detail is small, and it is chilling. The servants turned the mattresses over. They did it so that a searcher who laid a hand on the bedding would not feel the warmth of a body that had lain there minutes before. A warm bed in an empty room is a question, and a question leads to a search of that room, and a thorough search of the right room finds the trapdoor. So they cooled the beds by hand before the searchers ever came upstairs. At the door itself stood Anne Vaux. She was one of the 2 sisters who leased the house from its owner, Henry Ferrers, and ran it as a base for the mission. And on this morning she met the pursuivants herself, in her nightgown, as if roused from ordinary sleep. She stalled them. She told them her mistress was not yet out of bed and could not receive them, and she made them wait on the manners of the moment, while below her feet 10 people settled into cold water. Every minute she bought at that door was a minute the men below did not have to be found. She was not alone in the delaying. Out in the yard, the stable boys armed themselves with farm implements and physically blocked the pursuivants when they tried to force their way in. It was not a battle. It was friction, the deliberate slowing of armed men by unarmed ones, buying time in seconds and minutes. And time was the whole game, because the longer the household could delay the start of the real search, the colder those beds became, and the calmer the men below grew. Then the search began in earnest, and it went on for roughly 4 hours. The pursuivants moved through the house room by room. They were not careless men. They knew that recusant houses held hides, and they knew what they were looking for, and they went at it with the patience of people who had done this before. They tapped walls. They measured rooms. They looked for the gap between what a room should be and what it was. And in room after room, they found nothing, because the one door they needed was a trapdoor in a sacristy floor, disguised as the mouth of a long-dead privy, built by a man who built these things for a living. Anne Vaux herself left us the best description of that fruitless morning, and it is worth quoting in her own words rather than paraphrasing it. She said the pursuivants behaved just like a lot of boys playing blind man's buff. That is her line, from the woman who stood at the door and watched them hunt. It is not a historian's summary written centuries later. It is the voice of the person who ran the house, describing armed government searchers as blindfolded children groping at empty air, reaching and missing, reaching and missing for 4 hours in a house that held 10 fugitives. And here the story does something almost unbelievable. When the search was finally called off, Anne Vaux had the pursuivants serve breakfast before they left. She fed them. The men who had come to tear her household apart sat down to a meal in that same household and were sent away with full stomachs and empty hands. It was hospitality as camouflage, one last performance of the innocent hostess who had nothing to hide and no reason to hurry anyone off her land. There is one further detail that some accounts attach to this morning, and honesty requires flagging it clearly. A single weaker source claims that someone paid the pursuivants a bribe of 12 gold pieces to bring the search to an end. That claim is not corroborated by the stronger accounts, and it should not be told as settled fact. It may have happened. It may be a later embroidery. What we can say with confidence is that the household stalled, hid, and fed the searchers, and that the searchers left without their prize. The 12 gold pieces belong in the margin, marked as unconfirmed, not in the centre of the story. What we can say with confidence is that the raid was real, and that it was recorded by men who were inside the hide. 2 of the 10 wrote it down. John Gerard set it into his own autobiography, the account later published as the story of a hunted priest. Henry Garnet described it in a letter to his superior general in Rome, Claudio Acquaviva. So the 4 hours in the cold water are not a legend passed mouth to mouth. They come to us from the memory of the men who stood in that water, writing to explain how narrowly they had lived. Now hold the whole picture in your mind and feel the size of it. Every Jesuit priest and novice in England had gathered here the day before. The leadership of the entire mission was under one roof. And that was the roof the pursuivants chose to raid at 5 a.m. If Owen's hide had failed, if one searcher had leaned on the right board or noticed the wrong seam in the sacristy floor, the government would not have caught a single fugitive priest. They would have caught the command of the whole underground church in one net, in one morning, in one house. Contemporaries understood this exactly. They regarded the raid as an existential threat, a moment when a network built up patiently over years could have been destroyed in a single hour. Everything the mission had assembled, the safe houses, the routes, the trust, the men, sat concentrated in 10 bodies standing in a sewer under a Warwickshire manor. One discovery would have unravelled all of it. The margin between survival and collapse was the thickness of a joiner's trapdoor and the nerve of a woman in a nightgown at the door. And the margin held. It held because of cold, unglamorous competence. It held because Owen had built the hide so well that 4 hours of professional searching could not find its door. It held because the servants cooled the beds and hid the boots. It held because the stable boys pushed back at the gate and Vaux talked and delayed and then, at the end, poured out breakfast as though the whole morning had been an ordinary inconvenience. Every one of those small human acts was a load-bearing part of the same structure, and none of them failed. Below the floor, the 10 waited in silence and heard the search pass over them and recede. They did not know from moment to moment whether the next set of boots would stop above the sacristy. They only knew to stand still in the cold and trust the wood and stone around them and the people above and the man who had built the place. For more than 4 hours that trust was all they had, and it was enough. The pursuivants took their breakfast from Vaux and rode away empty-handed, and not one of the 10 people hidden below the sacristy floor that October morning in 1591 had been found. The pursuivants took their breakfast from Vaux and rode away empty-handed, and not one of the 10 people hidden below the sacristy floor that October morning in 1591 had been found. Under the kitchen, in the cold stone channel Nicholas Owen had cut into the medieval drain, 5 priests and 5 other men waited until the last horse was gone from the causeway. Only then did the trapdoor lift. They climbed out one by one, soaked to the knee, stiff and grey-faced after more than 4 hours crouched in the dark. Outside, the moat lay flat under a low Warwickshire sky, and the Forest of Arden pressed close to the water as it always had. The house had held. And that is the strange thing about Baddesley Clinton, the reason its story does not end the way these stories usually end. Most of the houses in a tale like this one end in fire, or in a sale for scrap, or in slow collapse under death duties and neglect. Baddesley Clinton did none of that. The Ferrers family held it for roughly 500 years, across 12 generations, from a marriage into the Brome family around the year 1500 down, almost to living memory. That is an extraordinary run for any English house. Henry Ferrers, the antiquary who built out the Great Hall and set stained glass into its windows, was the legal owner through the whole of the persecution. He had leased the place to the Vaux sisters in 1588 and gone away to his work in London, and the house he left behind outlasted the raids, the plots, the searches, and every man who ever hammered on its gate. The moat, that may first have been dug as a firebreak against the forest, went on doing its quieter work. The Arden sandstone wall that rises straight out of the water never took the damp, sealed by the lime in its own stone rather than by any mortar or render. The house simply went on standing, year after year, while the world that had wanted to search it died away. Think about what that continuity means. Up and down England, houses like this one were torn down for their stone, gutted by fire, or emptied by families who could no longer pay to keep them. The Ferrers were Roman Catholic recusants, people who refused to attend the Protestant church and paid crippling fines for it, and who sheltered hunted priests under the threat of death for the whole of the Elizabethan age. They had every reason to lose everything. A single betrayal, a single hide found with a priest inside it, and the head of the family could have gone to the scaffold and the estate to the crown. And yet they did not lose it. The house came through the most dangerous century a Catholic family could live through, and then through 300 years more, and it is still here. But the man who made that silence possible did not go on. Nicholas Owen, the short carpenter with the twisted spine and the limp he had carried since a fall in 1599, was still at his trade 15 years after the raid. The other Jesuits knew him as Little John, and for years he had been the most wanted craftsman in England, though almost no one outside the mission knew his face or his name. He had worked alone, always at night, so that not even the household servants could say where his hides lay. He had taken no wages, giving away any coin pressed on him, and he had built not only the 3 hides at Baddesley Clinton, but priest holes in house after house across Catholic England, at Court and Court, at Harvington Hall, at Oxburgh Hall, at Scotney Old Castle. In January 1606, in the frightened weeks after the gunpowder plot, pursuivants surrounded Hindlip Hall in Worcestershire, where Owen was hidden once more with Father Henry Garnet. After days without food in the cold, Owen gave himself up, it is said in the hope that the searchers would take him for a priest and call off the hunt. They did not. They knew exactly who they had. They took him to the Tower of London. There they put him to the rack. The law of the time forbade the torture of a man as broken in body as Owen was, so they are said to have hung him from the wall by his wrists instead, with irons on him. Hour after hour, day after day, he gave them nothing. Under all of it, he never named a single hiding place, not one of the dozens he had built, not the sewer hide at Baddesley Clinton, where 10 people had stood in the water and lived. They had wanted the names of houses, the maps of the hides, the network of families who sheltered priests, and above all the whereabouts of the men still at large. Owen carried all of it in his head. On the 6th day his body gave out, and he died in their hands, still silent, and he carried it out of the world without a word. For that silence he was, 3.5 centuries later, remembered by name. In 1970, Pope Paul VI canonized Nicholas Owen as one of the 40 martyrs of England and Wales. The lay brother, who took no payment, who signed his work only in the fact that the people he hid were never found, was made a saint. It is a strange kind of monument for a man whose entire craft had been to leave no trace at all. His memorial is not a tomb that anyone can visit. It is the empty spaces he built, still there inside the walls, still doing nothing, still hiding no one, exactly as he meant them to look. Corton, Harvington, Oxborough, Scotsney, and Baddesley Clinton itself, all of them still standing with his work inside them, are in a sense his relics. The house, meanwhile, settled into a long quiet. For nearly 400 years after that October dawn, nothing tried to break into Baddesley Clinton again. The priests who survived the raid scattered back to their dangerous work, some to be caught later, some to die abroad, and the house that had saved them slipped out of the headlines of its age and into a gentler obscurity. Generations of Ferrers were born and buried. The forest around it was cleared and farmed and tamed, and the moat that had once been a defence became simply a beautiful thing to look at. By the 1860s, the novelist Georgiana Chatterton was in residence with her husband Edward Heneage Daring, writing her books in rooms where hunted men had once waited for the knock at dawn. In 1940, a relative of the Ferrers line, Thomas Walker, bought the house and kept it within the family's long orbit. His son inherited it in 1970, and in 1980, Baddesley Clinton passed to the National Trust, which has held and shown it ever since. 500 years of one family, and then a careful handing over to the nation, with no fire and no auctioneer's hammer waiting at the end of the road. So what stands beside the moat now is not a ruin and not a reconstruction. It is the thing itself, a moated Tudor manor of Arden sandstone and half timbering, Grade 1 listed, and a scheduled ancient monument, reached across the same stone bridge the pursuivants once crossed at 5 in the morning. Stand on that bridge for a moment before going in. The water is the same water, more or less, the moat that circled the house when armed men rode up to it in the dark. The sandstone front rises out of it exactly as it did then, unbothered by the wet, and the reflection sits under it as if nothing had ever happened here. Inside, the rooms are furnished and warm, and it takes an effort to remember that 10 people once crouched in the drain beneath one of them, holding their breath while boots crossed the boards overhead. Walk the rooms, and Owen's 3 hides are all still there, still where he left them more than 400 years ago. In the corner of the kitchen there is an opening, and if you look down through it, you see the medieval drain itself, the narrow cold channel where Henry Garnet and 4 other priests stood in the water through that long October search. Behind the fireplace of the great parlour is the way down into the library hide, cut in beneath the floor. Above a bedroom closet, tucked into the roof space, is the smallest of the 3, just 3 feet 9 inches high, too low for a grown man to do anything but sit hunched in the dark. None of it has been dressed up or guessed at. These are the real hollows made by the real hands that were later destroyed rather than give them away. And that is the whole point of the place, the thing that sets it apart from the burned and broken houses in every other tale we tell. Baddesley Clinton survived because Owen's hide worked, and Owen's hide worked because nobody talked. The stable boys who gripped their farm tools at the gate did not talk. Anne Vaux, who met the searchers at the door in her nightgown and later said they behaved like a lot of boys playing blind man's buff, did not talk. The servants who pulled off the boots and turned the mattresses so the beds would not feel warm did not talk. And Nicholas Owen, on the rack in the tower, did not talk. Every one of them held. That is the quiet miracle of the place. Fire took other houses, and debt took others still, but what saved this one was not luck and not money. It was people keeping their mouths shut, and one man dying rather than open his. But because they held, the house held, and because the house held, you can still walk in across the bridge today and stand exactly where they stood. The house is their monument, and the drain in the kitchen corner is the plainest gravestone in England, marking not a death, but 10 lives that were kept. The survival of this manor is the survival of one man's craft, and the silence of everyone who ever knew its secret. Cross the stone bridge at Baddesley Clinton today and look down into the corner of the kitchen, and you can still see the medieval drain where Henry Garnet and 4 other priests stood in the dark in October 1591. In a house the National Trust has kept whole since 1980.